Hi everyone, it's Natasha here from Buttonnose Crochet again. Welcome back to part 5 of the Carnival of Flowers video tutorial. In this section we'll be doing double crochet clusters and popcorns, and this will be the last section before we start squaring off. So get your yarn and hook and we'll start this section. So to start this section, round 31, what we're going to do is make a single crochet in the first stitch of the previous round. For this round I'm using Bastongne, the teal colour. And then what we want to do is single crochet in the next 21 stitches. So we will have 22 single crochet in total. So pause the video and I'll meet you back once I've made my extra 21 single crochets. Okay, so I've made my first single crochet plus 21. Next, what we want to do is make an increase, so 2 single crochet in the next stitch. So we just repeat that around, 22 single crochet increase, all the way around to the start of the round. So I'll meet you back at the start of the round. Okay, so I'm at the end of round 31 and I've finished with 2 single crochet in my last stitch. So what we want to do is just slip stitch to the first stitch, and that is round 31. To start round 32, this is where things will start getting technical, as in terms of lining up your stitches to mark out the corners for the blanket. What we need to do is slip stitch to the third single crochet. That's if you're using the same colour. If you're changing colours, make a standing double crochet cluster V in the third stitch. So we make a double crochet 2 together, chain 1, double crochet 2 together. That's our first stitch. So that's our first cluster V. Next, this is our repeat. Skip 2 stitches. Sorry, what we need to do is skip 2 stitches and make a double crochet cluster V in the next stitch. And then skip 2 stitches, and that will be our repeat. So we'll finish off by skipping the first 2 stitches of the round. So our last 2 stitches that we skip are stitch 1 and 2 of the previous round. So pause the video and repeat that around, and then when we finish this round we're going to mark which cluster V's are going to be in line with our corners. So you'll need 4 stitch markers at the end of this round. Okay, so I'm at the end of round 32 and I've made my last cluster V. So we skip the next 2 stitches and we slip stitch into the first double crochet 2 together. If you're changing colours, fasten off. Before we go on to the next round, we need to start marking out where our corners will be. So what we need to do is place a stitch marker in the 6th cluster, count 24 cluster V's, and then place a stitch marker in the next cluster V. Now these cluster V's should be in line. just get my pen, should be in line with the center of the cluster groups. So you'll need 4 of these. So because there's 96 clusters, cluster V's, you will need to have, you count 24, and in the 25th you put a stitch marker. So that's what you do, and in between you'll have, so you got your first one, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, put a stitch marker in the next one. So continue that around, so you'll have 4 stitch markers, and you'll have, so they'll be in line in the middle of your clusters, and you'll have 2 full clusters in the middle. So these will end up being your corners. So what we'll be doing in this section of part 5 is, as we're making it, we're going to be moving our stitch markers up in line, so that way when we come to round 36, where we do our setup round for our for squaring off to do our corners, all we need to do is just have our stitch markers right there. So that way, this is the easiest way to figure out where our corners will be. So let's go on to round 33. To start round 33, what we're going to be doing is making a starting popcorn in the chain 1 space of the first cluster V. So this is just a normal popcorn, so 5 double crochets, pull up a loop, put your hook in the first stitch, bring it around, pull the loop back onto your hook and pull through, and your first popcorn's made. Chain 1 to secure. Next we're going to chain 3, and then popcorn in the next, cluster V, chain 1 of the cluster V. Don't know why I'm doing double crochet togethers. So that's what we do. So popcorn in the next cluster V, chain 3, and we just repeat that around, finishing with a chain 3 and slip stitching to our first popcorn. So pause the video while we make this round. Okay, so I've finished round 33 and I finished with a chain 3. So what we want to do is slip stitch into the top of the popcorn. So see where there's a little hole there? Slip stitch into there. And if you're changing colours, fasten off. So that's round 33. Now, as you had done this round, you would have moved your stitch markers up into your popcorns. So if you haven't done that already, move your stitch markers up, and that way we keep our stitch markers in line with the center of the cluster groups. So let's start round 34. So to start round 34, I'm using Eelde, and what I want to do is make a standing half double crochet in the chain 3 space, So if you're using gradient yarn, just slip stitch into that chain space, chain 1 and make a half double crochet. Next we want to make another 2 half double crochet in the same chain space, and then we want to do a front post half double crochet around the popcorn. Now for our repeat for this round, 3 half double crochet in the chain 3 space, front post half double crochet around the popcorn. Now when you get to your stitch markers, just move your stitch marker up into the front post half double crochet. So repeat that around and finish with a front post half double crochet, and pause the video and I'll meet you back at the start of the round. Okay, so I have finished round 34 and I have finished with a front post half double crochet. So to finish this round, we just slip stitch into the first half double crochet, and that is the end of round 34. Okay, so we're going on to round 35. I'm not changing colours, so what we're going to do is we can chain 2 and double crochet in the same stitch. Now that chain 2 does not count as a stitch, so when you come back around, we slip stitch to the first double crochet, not into the chain 2. And then what we want to do is just double crochet in each stitch around. So pause the video and I'll meet you back at the start of the round. Okay, so I'm at the end of round 35, and so what we're going to do is slip stitch to that first double crochet, not the chain 2, and just fasten off if you're changing colours. Now before we go on to round 36, as you can see, this round doesn't exactly sit flat, but while you're doing the round, you'll notice that where your marked stitch is, the double crochet that goes into the front post double crochet that you had marked, it's to the side, so it's not in line anymore. So what we need to do is move our stitch marker over to the double crochet that was made in the first half double crochet, and that way it stays in line for our corners. Now make sure that all your stitch markers are like that. Another thing too is to count 96 stitches from stitch marker to stitch marker. So the next stitch marker will be in stitch 97. So you got to have 96 stitches between the stitch markers. Well, stitch marker to the stitch before the next marker. And also too, another thing to make sure before we go on to the next round is we've got our marked stitch here with the popcorn underneath, but what we need to make sure is that we have 4 popcorn to the left, that's in line with the center treble popcorn, and 4 popcorn to the right, that's in line with the center popcorn. So they only need to be roughly in line, but that's our gauge to know that we are where we should be. So measure and check, just like the saying is, measure twice, cut once. Well, this is where that saying will come into place. We need to measure twice, even 3 times, before we go on to our next round, because in these marked stitches we're going to be making a chain 2 space for our corner flowers to be made. And we got to make sure that we've got the correct amount of stitches between the stitch markers before we actually start the corners. Otherwise we're going to run into trouble when we start squaring the blanket off. So take your time, make sure that your stitch marker is in line with your popcorn, that you got 4 popcorns either side of the marked popcorn in line with the center treble popcorns, and that this stitch marker is still in line to the middle of our cluster groups. This is how we line up our corners. So just keep checking, and if you're slightly out, move your stitch marker 1 or 2 stitches, just to make sure that everything is lined up with your stitch marker. So now that we're sure that our stitches are lined up, we're going to go on to round 36. Okay, for round 36, I'm using Bastongne, the teal colour. I'm actually changing my background colour with the squaring off, and then I'll change to this really dark colour for the background of my extended section. So that way the circle pops out, it makes a bit of a showcase, and then the next shade, so the Bastongne will be the background for the next section, and then the Wilderness will be the background for the extended section. So to start this round, we need to make a standing back post half double crochet around the stitch before the stitch marker. Now if you're not changing colours, you'll need to chain 1, back post half double crochet around the first stitch, and then back post half double crochet to the stitch before the stitch marker. Next, we're going to make back post half double crochet around the stitch that had the stitch marker, chain 2, and then back post half double crochet around that same stitch. Now just put your stitch marker back into that chain 2 space. I apologise if my hands are a little bit in the way. Next, we're going to back post half double crochet around each stitch to the next stitch with the stitch marker, and then we're going to repeat that, back post half double crochet, chain 2, back post half double crochet around the same stitch. So once you've completed this, you will have 97 stitches from chain 2 between each chain 2 space. So you should have 97 stitches once you've gone from stitch marker to stitch marker. So repeat that around, back post half double crochet around each stitch to the stitch marker, back post half double crochet, chain 2, back post half double crochet around the stitch with the stitch marker. Now before I go any further, I'm going just to be double check that this chain 2 space is sitting directly above my popcorn, which it is. And that's what we want. We want the chain 2 space to be directly above the popcorn. So complete this round, and even when you get to the next chain 2 space, stop and make sure you have 97 stitches, 97 back post half double crochets between the chain 2 corners. Because if you don't, it's easier to fix when you've only done 96 stitches instead of 384 stitches. So yeah, so pause the video and finish this round, and you'll finish with a back post half double crochet, and we'll just slip stitch, and then I'll talk you through to before we have to go on to part 6, which will be the corners. Okay, so I'm at the end of round 36, so all I need to do is just slip stitch to the first back post half double crochet and fasten off. Now, if you're using a gradient or one colour, the next part, part 6, you will need to fasten off with each round because they're slip stitched into the back of this round. It's not worked from corner to corner, so to speak. So that is our part 5. We've made our popcorns and we have created the corners for our flowers to square off. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you with the next tutorial where we will be doing the flowers in the corner, and I'll be explaining about stitch placement in that part too. So with squaring off, you've got to be making sure that your stitches are in the right place, otherwise you could run into trouble with it not being centered. So thank you for following along, and I'll see you with part 6. Bye.